This is the conclusion of our study, so if you missed the other parts of this week, you want to go back and look at that, because this is just kind of wrapping it up. We're going to be wrapping up Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 through 31. So we had a little bit of a bigger section, but a lot of it was just describing that wisdom existed before anything that was made. Kind of talked about a few of the things that were made, even the dust of the earth. Wisdom was there before that. And now we're looking at how we can kind of apply this to our lives, right? How do we apply this idea that wisdom existed forever? Wisdom did all these things. Wisdom is very, very much like Jesus. If not, this is not at least very a typified kind of Jesus, if not really describing him in detail. And so how do we apply this? Okay, what are we going to do? Now that we've read this, what should we do? How should we respond? So if you haven't already received enough reasons to study and embrace God's wisdom, I hope this will seal the deal for you. To reject wisdom is to reject Christ. You may struggle to grow in wisdom. You might be lacking wisdom right now. That's okay. That's a start, right? But to flat out reject wisdom is stamping your own passport to hell. That is ultimate foolishness. To reject Christ, to reject his wisdom. To reject wisdom is to reject him. So if we're looking through this and we're like, yeah, I don't want to do any of this stuff. I'm going to do what I think is right. That was outwardly rejection of Jesus. It is. It definitely is. So when we talk about, we got to follow the commands of Jesus. Some people like to separate those from like what's in the Old Testament. Well, the commands of Jesus are different from what God said in the Old Testament. Really? Since Jesus was quoting most of the Old Testament when he was going through, he quotes from the Old Testament all the time. Like a lot of the stories that he uses are actually stories from the Old Testament. Like a lot of the parables have direct connotations and connections, if not a repetition of Old Testament ideas and stories. So, Jesus even says, wisdom will be justified by her deeds. Where does he get that from? Proverbs, right? And so if you don't know the Old Testament, you don't know what Jesus is saying fully. You can get confused in that. And so you need to go back. So if you're going to reject, you cannot reject this wisdom that we find here and say, well, that's Solomon's wisdom. That's Old Testament wisdom. Those are Old Testament commands, instructions. And we don't need that. That's Old Testament stuff. I'm in the New Testament. I'm under the commands of Christ. Well, the commands of Christ are these. Right? You do disservice to the Old Testament if you separate the two. Because if you look at the words of Jesus, the commands of Jesus, all that stuff has already been said before, really. He doesn't really say anything new. He's just calling people back. He's saying, hey, go back to what I already told you. Because if you say, well, this is, who said these things in the past, though? Who said the things in the Old Testament? It was God, right? Jesus is God. So he said those things in the past. So I'm going to say, well, he changed his mind. He's got different commands for you now. And I understand the civil law that the theocracy of Israel were under. That is different. That will never happen again. Yes, that was a special time. We understand that, right? But, these commands that are found in Proverbs aren't necessarily connected to the theocracy of Israel. These things existed. Most of this was probably already around before Israel. Abraham, Job knew Proverbs, right? That's what he was doing. That's what the book of Job is. It's just really Proverbs that are just bantered back and forth. And so much of what you see in Job, the ideas that are in Job are in the book of Proverbs. And maybe some of the Proverbs are from Job in Job's time. And so this wisdom is a eternal wisdom, like we said. This wisdom has always existed, so you can't separate it out, right? It's very, it's just a way for us to escape the commands. And it's a way for us to make it easier on ourselves. So like, the commands of Jesus are just to just to love. That's it. That's all you gotta do. Nothing else. To be holy means you just love. Well, yeah, there is love in there, yes, but it says love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with the heart, soul, mind, and strength. Where does that come from? Old Testament, right? So we got to be careful that we don't separate out. But if you're going to reject wisdom, and even if you're going to reject what's in the book of Proverbs, really you're rejecting Jesus. And if you reject Jesus, then you're on the way to hell. That's ultimately foolishness, is what described here in Proverbs. Because you don't fear the Lord then. You're missing that. Number 2, if you're thinking today, I need more wisdom, then you're in a good place. A humble person realizes that they need more wisdom. The wise always seek more wisdom. If you want to be wise, then seeking wisdom is the best thing. If you're saying to yourself, you know what, I don't have enough. Yes, that is the right place. That is true acknowledgement. Yes, you don't have enough wisdom, right? You don't have enough of wisdom in you, directing you, guiding you, protecting you. You don't have enough of that, and you want more. Never get to the place where you become conceited in your own understanding, where you get to a place where like, I got this all figured out. I got wisdom down pat. I got knowledge. I've got understanding. I got it all, right? We should be growing more and more. We should learn more and more. We should be understanding more and more. And yes, that's true. When we get to the place where we become conceited in our own thoughts, then we got a problem. You know, it's not our wisdom is not based on, wisdom doesn't exist because we know it, right? I think some people think that. Wisdom always exists. Wisdom has always existed. And so we're not coming up with anything new. And that's the kind of idea when you look at the book of Hebrews. This is not anything new that's in the book of Hebrews. It's actually the Old Testament repeated, explained, elaborated. You know, how is this all supposed to happen? What is supposed to come on? What was supposed to go on? And what do these things mean? And that's what Hebrews is all about. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. But this book of Proverbs here, it's great. It's awesome that it's kind of stands next to Psalms, which is another wisdom literature book. But they kind of stand in the middle, right? And when you open your Bible, it's kind of like in the center. This wisdom literature, which is great because that's exactly, it binds the Old Testament narrative to the New Testament narrative. And they're both drawing on this idea of wisdom. And that's where a lot of these ideas are coming out of, is this eternal wisdom, this fount of wisdom, who is Jesus. That's where these ideas are coming from. So we need to think, yes, I need to get more wisdom. I need to desperately want wisdom. I think that's what we have been learning over and over again here. And if we haven't gotten to that place yet, we need to do that now. Like, just stop everything. Like, I need more wisdom. I need to see what God has to say. I need more of this book in my life. And when we do that, we'll know Christ better. You study these words, you study Proverbs, you're going to get more understanding who Christ is and what he wants and what he loves and what he commands. Because it'll elaborate for you. It'll explain it to you. You'll know more. So that is our study for this week. We'll put it to the end here, put it to the close. Bringing this together here. Yeah, awesome. Wisdom was there. Wisdom always been there. And that's what we learned in this section. Now, next time we'll be looking at the end of Proverbs chapter 8 before we move on to 9. And then we're going to skip some and go later on. But for now, we're just going to be looking at the end of chapter 8 next week. And just kind of wrapping this up here. This kind of book of Solomon at the beginning of Proverbs. And so I'll see you back here next week, and we'll take a look at that. All right. See you then.